Hi, Peter Walker here, and welcome to today's edition of the Transition Guy. Now, joining me today from Manhattan is Jeffrey Madoff, who's a professor, author, and host of Creative Careers, Making a Living with Your Ideas. Welcome, Jeffrey.
Well, thanks for having me on, Peter.
Yeah, look, the subject you cover is absolutely fascinating. I mean, I was thinking about what to call today's episode. Because, I mean, you're talking about sort of coming up with creative ideas and making a living out of it. And I was thinking, and a few people do that. And actually I really wanted to call today's episode, Stop Making Fucking Excuses and Do Something with Your Ideas. Because you and I both know that so many people out there have great ideas, say that they've had it way before anybody else, but they have done nothing with it. And there's not just one idea, it's 2, 3, 4, 5. They've always got ideas they do nothing with. So today, maybe we can cover why that is, and more importantly, how do we get these people, or how do we get people to get off their backside and actually do something with those ideas that they have?
Well, you're laying out quite a challenge, Peter. You know, it's also those same people know that they should exercise and eat healthy, and most of them don't do that either. So you're dealing with some aspects of psychology and human behavior that if we can unlock the code to that, we can be incredibly successful.
But why is it that some people are so able to do that?
Well, you know, it's interesting. I start my class that I teach at Parsons School of Design in New York. The first day of class, I'll say to students, how many of you have been to a gallery or been to a store or been somewhere where you've seen things and you said, oh, I had that same idea. I could have done that. And I say to them, so what's the difference between you and them? Silence. First, there's silence. And then somebody will say, they actually did it. So say that. Could you say that again, please? They actually did it. That's right. The difference between you and them is they did it. They executed on the idea. So that old phrase, I haven't adjusted this for inflation yet, but that old phrase of ideas are a dime a dozen. The reason is it's easy to spew stuff out there. It's very difficult to actually make it happen. So I think that can be, to many, an insurmountable obstacle in their mind. Clearly, there's amazing things that can be done that had lots of obstacles in the way that were executed and have become major businesses. But I think that the main thing is overcoming the idea that, you know, if basically you're sitting there thinking all the time, well, I could have done that, I could have done that, then you have to ask yourself, well, then why didn't you? Right? You know, why didn't you do that? And so the question then becomes, what is the obstacle between you and execution?
And I think I was going to say, I think that's a really big obstacle here and now. I mean, I think it was in November 2021, the US had something like 4.8 million people resign. It was called the Great Resignation. And a lot of these people were fed up with the status quo. And I'm sure so many of them went out there and thought, yeah, no, I've got these great ideas. I can do it better. And they're sort of sitting, not working at the moment. Quite a few people that I have known are sitting on a lot of money that they saved during lockdown with a great idea, eating away at the money they've saved.
Well, you know, that notion of the Great Resignation is a bit of a myth, because that Great Resignation notion first was coined, the people who were not taking jobs or leaving their jobs, some had a savings. I mean, most people in the United States, unfortunately, can't even last a month without working because people aren't very good about saving or budgeting their funds. And so there's going to be something that happens there, right? Because the necessity is the mother of invention, and it becomes necessary to make some money just to keep food on the table, so to speak. So the Great Resignation actually became a buzz term, but it wasn't realistically backed up by the data.
Right.
But what I do think happened that is really significant is that COVID, especially during lockdown, caused a lot of people to hit the pause or reset button. You know,
It was
sorry,
it was the first time that the world had actually stopped.
Right. That's right. And I think that gave people that pause to really reflect on, am I happy doing what I'm doing? You know, do I want to be doing what I'm doing? Do I ever want to return to an office again? You know, all of these radically new questions that people had to really struggle with in terms of what they were doing or what they could do. Maybe this is an opportunity to do something I've always wanted to do. And now, for the first time in my life, it's almost like I have permission to do it.
Right.
You know, and I think that's a big thing. But the issue of having an idea, then executing on that idea and bringing it to the marketplace is not new. I think COVID brought it much more to the forefront because people had a lot more time on their hands and time when they weren't going into work and that sort of thing to really rethink what they were doing, which I think is a healthy thing at any stage of life, is to be conscious about, well, why am I doing what I'm doing? If I hate this, why am I doing it? If I have a better idea of how I can seek fulfillment, both emotionally and financially, how do I do that? And what's been preventing me from doing that? And that's a lot of what my book is about. And so I wrote it before COVID. The funny thing is, I was going to be doing the audio for it. COVID closed down the audio studio of my publisher. Right. And so, you know, I had an impact after it was written. Of course, it also negated book tours live and all that sort of a thing. But we had to think about all kinds of new ways, because I had to execute on the idea of, I have a book now, a product, if you will, that I've got to promote. How am I going to do that in this circumstance where the world has stopped, where travel has stopped, where you can't meet with people in person? I had to think about, how in the hell am I going to do that? Because this product is ready to go. And I call it a product because whatever creative process I have that made the book, once the book is done, then it's a product. Right. It's something that I need to sell so I can keep writing books and keep doing those things. But I had to rethink the whole way that I'm even going to promote it, because all the normal pathways to the consumers, there were huge roadblocks, and that huge roadblock was called COVID. Yeah. So it's, you know, it's interesting. So that it affected me directly, and I had to come up with solutions quickly because there's a limited window where an idea is new. And as soon as that idea hits the marketplace and shows any indications of success in regular business, you know, you start with Uber, then all of a sudden you've got Lyft, and there were at one point 5 other private car services available in New York. Some have survived. It's mostly Uber and Lyft now, and they're still having very difficult challenges in working, you know, in making them viable businesses. But there are always obstacles in business. But I do think that, going back to your Great Resignation notion, is that it's always difficult to actualize an idea and make a business out of it. The question is, so how do you do that?
And how do you do that? Or how do the successful people out there do that?
Well, what I think you have to do, first of all, is actualize the idea. So what does that mean? You know, it doesn't have to be, in my book, Creative Careers, most people think of creativity as being in the arts, which of course it is. But I think entrepreneurship in and of itself is a creative career, because entrepreneurship means, just like if you're writing a book or a play or scoring music or choreographing a dance, it starts with an idea. And when you're an entrepreneur, you have an idea in your head, and then you have to turn it into a business. And so I think that turning that into a business, how do you do that? And it's kind of like I mentioned with the book, is all of a sudden I had a product. I just did a play, and my play had its first commercial run last month, which is really exciting, really fun, years of work, really hard. But, at a certain point, I was talking with the director, who's fantastic, and we were discussing this. And, what you do when you have preview audiences in theater is just like you're having a focus group for a business.
Right.
You're testing real people's reactions who don't give a shit about your feelings, and you're getting real world reaction to what it is you're doing, because ultimately, for the play to survive, you have to sell tickets, right? So you've got to put something out there people are willing to buy. What happened with the play was we had sold out performances, which was great. Word of mouth was fantastic. Critical response was fantastic, which told me one important thing, or demonstrated the most important thing in business: proof of concept. So whatever kind of idea you have, whether it's a product or whether it's a service, you need to put it out there. It really doesn't make any difference what your mother or your spouse or your best friends tell you. They aren't going to write you a check.
That's true.
And what you need is, who is willing to actually pay for what I'm doing? And the only way you can really figure that out is to put it out there, test it, and see if there are people who are willing to part with their hard-earned cash to buy whatever product or service you're putting out there. Otherwise, it's all speculation, and you will never find out. And if your idea has any worth at all, somebody else you can bet is already further along than you. So you've got to, at a certain point, make that leap.
And that, like, making that leap doesn't mean that you have to do it alone, because a lot of these people that have great ideas, they think, okay, well, I've got to solve this problem on my own. When very often it's about surrounding yourself with enablers. People
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, to use my play as an example, when we did our first workshop, I'm in this room, and all of a sudden there's almost 60 people in the room when we're doing our first read through, what's called a table read. And I'm looking around before we start thinking, man, for the previous year and a half, I was writing this alone. And in order to even get it in front of people, it takes a whole lot of collaborators in order to do that. And you hit on a really important point, which is you need to surround yourself with the right people. I mean, of course, it depends how large that group is, depends on the kind of idea you have and what you have to do. But the basic principle is the same, which is you have to figure out, what does it take to bring that to market, to at least test it. So whether you can do that alone because you've created some kind of an app that you've already done all the background work on and put it out there, or whether you're doing something that involves a lot more people, the basic premise is the same. How do you get it in front of your potential consumer audience to see if anybody's actually willing to pay for it? And that's the proof right there, because if they aren't, you're not going to launch.
How much of a role do you think self-sabotage plays in this whole process, where that fear of failure is so high that they get so far, but they don't get far enough to make it viable?
Well, I think that you're right. And I think that one of the main things in terms of being an entrepreneur that I don't think most people, unless they've really been through the entrepreneurial process, which means getting a product out there, selling it, trying to build a business and so on. I think that the primary thing is not having a good idea. That is not the primary thing. The primary thing is, do you have the perseverance that you can stay with something and keep trying to push it forward? Because the odds are against you. The United States, 94% of businesses fail within 5 years. The odds are definitely against you. And perseverance, I think, ties into two things. One is you need to know why you're doing it, because it's going to be so fucking hard. And there's all this mythology out there about being an entrepreneur, which means, oh, I'm an entrepreneur. I control my own time. I make all the money from it. That's not how it really happens. You know, it really happens through a tremendous amount of effort in terms of getting something out there. And that's just getting it out there. Then you've got to build the business and sustain the business.
Right.
And it's all hard. But the images that we all have, especially of the startup entrepreneur, is this glorified fairy tale of you have a great idea and boom, the world ignites and is on fire and at your feet for what that great thing is you've done. That is so rare that, you know, the unicorn, so to speak, that is so rare. And so I think that your point brings up some very interesting psychological aspects, because what you have is that fear of failure. And when you have something out there, you don't just fail sitting in your room, there's people watching, right? So that fear of failure is a big thing. Overcoming that fear and doubt. And, you know, how do you assess the risk involved in doing that is a really big thing. And another part is imposter syndrome, where you wonder about your own qualifications to do something. And are people going to find out or somehow discover that you don't really know what the fuck you're doing? And that's another thing.
And the reality is, most people, when they get into business, they haven't got a clue.
That's right.
In fact, you're probably looking at a high 90% of people, if we were to use imposter syndromes, they're imposters until they understand what they're doing. They've proof of concept's been made, and they've actually become experienced at it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I wouldn't even call it being an imposter. It's you're trying and the results aren't in yet, you know, and that fear of people finding out that somehow you're not up to the task. I completely agree with you. So many people don't really understand that that's how everybody is when they start a business, because it's not, we're not dealing in certainties. You have to have confidence in yourself, but you're not dealing in certainties. And I think it's the rare few people who somehow have this unbounded confidence that allows them to push forward through, you know, whatever. And sometimes that's an early success that has set them up for further success and future success.
No, absolutely. Yeah, and the one thing I'd say to that is people have that imposter syndrome fear that, okay, they're going to be found out. Let's be honest with you. Let's be honest. Even during COVID and post-COVID, the marketplace, in many respects, has been delivering shitty service. And these are from companies that are well established. So I think people starting out fearing about imposter syndrome, I wouldn't worry about it too much, because even the big players are getting it wrong.
Well, and I think it's more about the fact that you're going to learn as you go.
Yeah.
And the hope is, of course, that you're going to know more today than you did yesterday, and you'll learn more tomorrow. And so there's a constant growth in terms of doing what you do, hopefully getting it right, and building a business. And, you know, in doing that and in that process, eventually, most of us gain some confidence in what we're doing. But I know people who have that, what we call imposter syndrome, who have been fantastically successful for years. But that inner insecurity always is kind of gnawing at them, because they're somehow afraid they're going to be found out and this is all going to be taken away from them.
But they've actually done something with the idea, though. There's a difference.
Absolutely.
So even though they're living with that fear, they've actually gone out there and they've done that proof of concept. They're actually live, they're living it.
That's right. That's right. And I think that that fear, what most people don't realize is that fear is so common. And, Franklin Roosevelt said, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. And that's really true.
Yeah.
That's a brilliant statement, because our own fears often paralyze us. And going back to your original question, I think that initial fear of failure is what keeps most people from executing on those ideas. I have never taken comfort in saying, oh, I had that idea. Because then I'm thinking, well, how the fuck didn't I do it? If I had that idea. So that's, I don't think there are any ideas that only one person has them.
Not with 8 billion people on the planet close to.
Who are online, who are seeing all the things that are going on. And, we all have ideas. When Uber came up with the idea, it was very interesting. When they came up with the idea of basically merging a smartphone with GPS that the government had put in place long before, I always found it interesting that they, called themselves, that their claim was they did it themselves. They were what in the States are called libertarians. They want as little government interference as possible in business and all that. On the other hand, they could have never started their business if the government hadn't involved billions of dollars of investment in setting up a GPS system, which they could use as the foundation for their company. So that's really interesting, because it's also looking at the assets that are out there and how do you combine things and put things together to execute. But they executed on a brilliant idea. They developed an application that could merge that GPS with a smartphone. And all of a sudden you could call and have a car there at your convenience.
And I'm sure they had good people surrounding them along the way that helped enable them to make an idea become a reality.
And I'm sure they weren't the first ones that had that idea, but they were the first ones to really bring it to market.
Yeah. And then you had other people that copied them. But when you're looking at where's your first port of call, when you want to get a ride, globally, it will tend to be Uber.
Which is also interesting, because brands, when you achieve the status that your name becomes synonymous with a product or a service. If you look back at old brands, Kleenex, well, that's facial tissue, but Kleenex is a brand name, but Kleenex became the name for facial tissue. And we now have things like Google, which has become a verb, right? Well, let's Google it, which means search. And Uber, let's Uber, it's, get a car.
Yeah, it's interesting.
It is. It's really interesting. And, Uber is an interesting example, because Uber did something that is the cardinal sin for any successful brand to do. And that is that they violated the public trust. And when they violated the public trust, their business took a huge hit and opened the door for other services to bring in that same kind of an opportunity. So, when you get out there and you put your idea out there, that's what I was saying about sustaining it. It's not just launching. It's also sustaining and building the business. And that's constant effort. But I think that the crux of so much today, and this ties back into the notion of the resignation, is that it's the notion of trust. And how do you build trust? And I don't think that you can continue to sell something. You can sucker people in it initially, but you can't continue to build something if you don't gain the trust of the consumer.
Yeah. And there's so much information out there. You've got to be so careful, because it can take a long time to build trust and a very short time to break it.
And we saw that with Uber, as a matter of fact. That's right.
And we've seen that with a number of other companies out there. We've seen it with, there's so many great examples of where someone's done something stupid and that's been magnified. So although your successes can be magnified, so can your screw ups.
Yeah. And I agree with you that it takes a long time to build a company, and you can make a misstep and that can take you down light speed.
Yeah.
You're in big trouble. But, you know, I think that going back to the original question, I mean, I love this because we're going all over the place, which I love to do, but is that if you have an idea, first of all, you have to realize, well, that's great. That's a starting point. But what am I going to do with that idea? So how do you figure out what you're going to do? Well, is there anything in the marketplace that is anything like this? So if you want to iterate off of Uber, what Via did, I don't know if they had Via. Did they have Via in England?
No.
Via was fabulous because what they did was ride sharing. So you could take a car, and oftentimes you still ended up being the only one in the car, but it was a ride sharing service that picked you up, dropped you off at your destination, and it cost about half of what it cost to use an Uber, because somebody figured, well, why do we need to put more cars on the road to make the roads more crowded, to make it harder to get there and more expensive? What if we gave, instead of private cars, we had these private little vans and they could take 5 people at a time? And so they used actually I think their foundation for what they used was Waze, which was an Israeli firm. And, you know, they were able to map out the most efficient routes so they could pick up people between the pickup point and the destination. And so they iterated on an already proven idea, which was the private car service, and built a business. Now they've gone just to selling all their data, which they accumulated, because COVID, unfortunately, was a contributor in getting them out of the private car business. But they had hugely valuable data on traffic patterns and all of that sort of thing that they were able to sell.
An interesting thing was that Uber then jumped on and added the ride sharing feature
That's
to
right.
their app.
That's right.
So people sort of tuning in today, a lot of people are going to have the great ideas, but they're not executing them. And this is really going to hurt them. How do that? Your book will obviously sort of help them with that. So how do they get hold of your book around the world?
Well, my book is available at all fine booksellers, Peter. I think in the UK, I don't know what bookstores, but I know it is on Amazon.
Which tends to be people's go-to anyway.
Yeah, it is. I still love bookstores, I have to say. I do love bookstores. I love picking up the book before I buy it. Maybe old school, but I think that also, and by the way, this is another business opportunity. People are returning to physical objects. And you're seeing this in the music world, where that became such an ephemeral thing with downloading music. You were no longer even buying CDs or records. Now the fastest growing category in music is vinyl. And all of the top musical recording artists, that's something they have to do. They're all want now vinyl out there, which is kind of a return to the past, but it's a physical object, because physical objects, we all like ownership, and you can own a physical object. You can't own a downloadable thing. You know, it's just not the same. And, you know, again, I know we're kind of going all over the place, but, you know, the things that you're bringing up spark different ideas, because there are so many opportunities. There are always opportunities for new ideas and new businesses. And so I think that, you know, getting something in front of your potential audience is so critical. Yeah, my book will help to a point, but it's the individual has to do their own work and look inward and figure out, well, if I always have all these good ideas, but nothing ever goes anywhere, what am I doing wrong? And you don't look for other books to help you figure that out. You know, you got to do, that's right. It's exactly right.
People, it's making sure you have the right people. Now, if people want to connect with you, how do they do that?
The best way to connect with me is on LinkedIn under B. Jeffrey Madoff. They can also go to my at a Creative Career Instagram site, or Madoff Productions, which is my production company. And on LinkedIn and at the at a Creative Career on Instagram, you'll see quotes from guests that I have in my class that address a lot of these questions also. And The good thing is they don't all agree. So you're going to get different facets and different ideas from different perspectives that you might find useful.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Jeffrey. You've been an absolutely great guest today. It's a really important topic. Hopefully our viewers have taken some good value out of it. The biggest thing I hope that people take out of it is that they get off their backside and actually execute on those fantastic ideas that they have, because I think that's really crucial. I mean, if you have an idea, you've had loads of ideas before that other people have pipped you to the post, and perhaps you don't want to let it happen again, head over to bulker.com and get in touch. Let's see whether we can surround you with the right people to bring your idea to life. Most importantly, remember that failing to learn is learning to fail. So please stay safe. And Jeffrey, once again, thank you so much.
Can I just add one quick thing here?
Of course you may.
Okay. And that is the true failure is not trying. It's not putting out something out there that doesn't work out. It's not trying. Because if you don't try, you'll never know. And that's the real failure, is giving up on an idea you have that you think has value because you're afraid.
Yeah, that is so true. And it's the ideas that have value. Thank you so much.
Thank you.